Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle James. I'm an A-level French student, and today I'm going to be going through all of the key tenses that you need to know in order to pass your French GCSE. On y va. So before we actually move on to the tenses, we're going to cover what are called subject pronouns. So subject pronouns are the words in the sentence that show who is doing the action. For example, I, you, he, she, we, you, and they. So in French, we have 6 key categories of subject pronouns, which I'm going to go through now. Firstly, we have je, which is I. We have tu, which is you. We have il and elle, which are he and she. We have nous, which is we. We have vous, which is you. And il, elle, which is they. Just note here that il is the masculine form and elle is the feminine form. Alors, so you can see that we have 2 ways of saying you in French. We have tu and we have vous. So what is the difference? So tu is an informal way of saying you. For example, est-ce que tu veux manger un gâteau avec moi? Whereas vous is seen as a more formal way of saying you. Now, both of these ways of saying you have their own conjugations in the different tenses that we're going to cover today. So, these are our subject pronouns. Let's move on to our first tense. So, firstly, we're going to cover the present tense. This is the most common tense in French, and it's a really key one to learn. And it can be translated in 2 ways. We can translate it as I do, which is sort of how we would expect it to be translated, but also I am doing. So it can be translated as that ing form of the verb. So we can say I eat, I am eating. And the way you translate it and the way you use it just depends on the context of the sentence, of course. So, quick recap of how to conjugate a verb in French. So we're going to take off the infinitive ending, so this er, ir, or re. So for example, we have manger is an er verb that ends in er. Ir verbs end in ir, of course, and re verbs will end in re. Now, each subject pronoun has its own ending. So we have je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, ils, elles. So let's start with er verbs. So we take off the ending and we add es, ons, ez, ent. For ir verbs, we take the ending off and we add on is, it, ils sont, isse, is. So we take off that ending and then we add on these endings to conjugate into the present tense. So finir is an ir verb and it would become je finis, tu finis, il finit, nous finissons, vous finissez, ils, elles finissent. Just be careful with your pronunciation because there are quite a few similarities in the way in which you pronounce these verbs. So, and finally we have re verbs, so we take off the ending, and let's say we have prendre, we would take off the ending, and we would have s, and then we have no ending for the il, elle form, and then the endings that we have for the er verbs in these plural forms is the exact same for these re verbs. So we can just slot those in there, and those are our endings. So for example, let's say prendre, we have je prends with an s, tu prends with an s, il, elle prend with no ending, nous prendons, vous prendez, and ils, elles prend. This ent and this ent are silent. You don't pronounce them as jouons or jouant, for example. We just say joue. So it's silent. So those are your endings for all the regular verbs in French for the present tense. Now, of course, there are irregular verbs to learn. And in this list here, I've included some of the most common ones. And we're going to go through those now. So first, let's look at aller. Aller is to go. And hopefully you know it's je vais, I go. tu vas, you go. Il, elle va, he, she goes. Nous allons, we go. Vous allez, you go. And ils, elles vont. Ils, elles vont. They go. So je vais, tu vas, il va. Nous allons, vous allez, ils vont. Excellent. Maintenant, nous allons regarder le verbe faire. So we're going to look at the verb faire in the present tense. This means to do or to make. And it becomes je fais, tu fais, il, elle fait. We then have nous faisons, vous faites, and ils, elles font. Just be careful, it's not faisait, it's vous faites. So je fais, tu fais, il fait, nous faisons, vous faites, ils font. And that's all coming from faire, to do or to make. Être becomes je suis, tu es, il, elle est. We then have nous sommes, we are. We then have vous êtes, with a hat on the first E. And then we have ils, elles sont. So être, to be, becomes je suis, tu es, il est. Nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. Excellent. Next we have devoir. Devoir is to have to. And that becomes je dois, I have to, I must. Tu dois, you have to, you must. Il, elle doit, he, she must. Nous devons, we must. Vous devez, you must. And then ils, elles doivent. So you can see it becomes regular for the nous and vous form. Nous devons, vous devez, and then it goes back to being irregular for ils doivent. Je dois, tu dois, il doit. Nous devons, vous devez, ils doivent. Excellent. Et finalement, on a le verbe pouvoir. Pouvoir signifie to be able to, or can. So the verb pouvoir is to be able to. And it becomes je peux, with an X, tu peux, with an X, il, elle peut, with a T, nous pouvons, vous pouvez, and ils, elles peuvent. And just be careful with your pronunciation here. It's not peuvent, it's ils peuvent. It's one sound. So pouvoir becomes je peux, tu peux, il peut, nous pouvons, vous pouvez, ils, elles peuvent. Excellent. So that is the present tense. We've gone through the regular endings and also some of the key irregulars. So you have aller, faire, être, devoir, pouvoir. Excellent. The next tense we're going to look at is called the perfect tense. So again, another really common tense in French. And just like the present tense, this can be translated in two ways. We can translate it as I did, or whatever the verb is. I ate, I cooked, I did. Or I have done, or I have eaten, I have said, things like that. So we can translate it in both of these ways. I did, or I have done. So if you get this in the translation, look at the context and think which one makes more sense. Now, to form the perfect tense, we need the present tense of avoir. Avoir is to have. And we also need a part of the verb called the past participle. Now, the past participle is like the ed part of the verb. So, for example, played is the past participle. It ends in ed. In done, done is an irregular past participle in English because it doesn't have that common pattern of having ed. So we didn't look at the present tense of avoir, but it's quite a common verb, so you should know it. And it becomes j'ai, tu as, il, elle a, nous avons, vous avez, ils, elles ont. So be careful here. It's not ils ont, it's ils ont. There's a Z sound that connects both of these sounds. So ils ont. not il, on. So we have j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. And then to form the past participle, we take off the ending, so that'll be er, ir, or re, and we add on a new ending depending on which verb we're dealing with. So for my er verbs, I'll take off the ending and add e accent. So for example, if we have manger, to eat, I take off the ending and add e accent to get manger. For my ir verbs, I take off the ending and add on an I. So for example, finir, to finish, I take the ending off and I add on an I to get fini. And for my re verbs, I take off the ending and add on a u. So for example, for vendre, to sell, I take off the ending and add on a u, vendu. So we have manger becomes manger, finir, fini, vendre, vendu. With your er verbs, be careful again because the pronunciation is pretty much identical between the infinitive and the past participle. We have manger and manger. You can't hear the difference. And that's the case with a lot of French words. So for example, if I wanted to say I ate, I take the I form of avoir in the present tense, which is j'ai, and then my past participle, manger. J'ai mangé. If I wanted to say we have finished, I would take the we form of avoir in the present tense, nous avons, and my past participle of finir, which is fini. Nous avons fini. And it works like that for all of your regulars. Note that we always have present tense of avoir. Well, for most verbs, we have the present tense of avoir, and we'll have that past participle. So there are some past participles that are irregular in French. So for example, for faire, we can't just take off the re and add a u, because that doesn't work. So it becomes fait with a t. Fait with a t. Avoir, we can't take off the ir and add an I, so it becomes u. J'ai eu. Lire, again, we can't follow that pattern, so it becomes lu. Dire becomes dit. Prendre becomes pris. Être becomes été. Boire becomes bu. And savoir becomes su. So these are some of the most important and most common irregular past participles in French. So it's really important that you know these. There are a few more things like devoir becomes du, mourir becomes mort, etc., etc. But for now, these are sort of the most important ones to know. So we know that we have to, most of the time, have the present tense of avoir plus the past participle. However, sometimes, for some verbs, we don't have that. And these are called our Mrs. Van der Tramp verbs. Now, we have this category of verbs because some verbs in the perfect tense will take the verb être instead of avoir. So we don't always use avoir. And for these, however many verbs, we will be using the verb être in the present tense instead of avoir. Let's go through what each letter stands for. So the M stands for monter. So I'm going to zoom in and write that. Monter. The R stands for revenir. Revenir, to return. The S, sortir. Sortir, to go out, to leave. V is venir, to come. A is for aller, which obviously means to go. N is for naître, which is to be born. D is for descendre. Descendre. E is for entrer. R is for retourner. Retourner. T is for tomber. A is for arriver, to arrive. M is for monter. And P is for partir. P is for partir, to leave. Alors, So with this set of verbs here, we don't use avoir, but we use être. So for example, if I wanted to say I have gone or I went, I don't say j'ai allé. That's wrong. I don't say that. Really common mistake. But we do say je suis allé. Je suis allé. That's correct. And that's how you should say it. So we don't say j'ai allé, we say je suis allé. Now, one really important thing when we're dealing with these Mrs. Van der Tramp verbs is that the past participle has to agree. So, for example, if I were going to say we went, that's nous sommes, not nous avons. Nous sommes allés, but it has to agree. So nous is plural, so allés also has to be plural with that S on the end. Nous sommes allés. So it has to agree in gender and in number. So that's a bit of a summary of the perfect tense. There's a little bit more to it than the other tenses in French, but it's a really useful one. And if in your writing or your speaking you can include an example of a Mrs. Van der Tramp verb, that would be really impressive to show off your knowledge. Alors, now we're going to move on to another tense, which is the imperfect tense. So this is another past tense in French, but it's used in a few different situations to the perfect tense. So we can use it to describe what used to happen. So what used to happen. We can describe it. We can use it to say what was happening, and we can also use it to give sort of background information, setting the scene. So remember, we can use it to say what used to happen or what was happening. So to form it, we have to take the present tense of our verb in the new form. So the new form in the present tense. So let's do an example of that together now. We might have nous jouons. Nous jouons. We play. Nous jouons. My second step is to remove the on, the ons. So we just get our stem. J-O-U. Nous jou. So we've got rid of the ons, and then we have to add our ending. And the endings I'm going to write in this table over here. Okay, so the great thing about the imperfect is that there is only one set of endings for all three categories of verb. And those are as follows. A, ion, ie, e. Now, as I was reading those out, you may have noticed how similar the pronunciation is. Ion, ie, e. So be really careful when you're writing that you do make that distinction between the person of the verb. So if we take our example of jouer that we've been using, I have my stem, which is J-O-U. I can get rid of the nous because I don't need to say nous. That's just my stem. So joue, and then I can add on my ending that I want. So I can have je jouais, tu jouais, il jouait, nous jouions, vous jouiez, il, elle jouait. So you can see that as a perfect example of the imperfect tense. So just be careful because in French you do still need to have the pronoun. So you would say, for example, je jouais, tu jouais, il jouait. So when you're writing or speaking, you do still need to have that pronoun to show who is doing the action. So there is one key irregular in the imperfect that you need to know at GCSE, and that is the verb être, to be. So être becomes j'étais, tu étais, il, elle était, nous étions, vous étiez, ils, elles, étaient. So the actual endings are the same. Ion, ie. However, it's just that sort of stem we have. J'étais, tu étais. It doesn't quite follow that normal pattern because we know that être in the new form in the present tense is nous sommes. And we can't use that as our stem. So that's the imperfect tense. What used to happen, what was happening, and that's how we form it. One set of endings for all three verbs. And we've also briefly discussed how we get our stem for the verb. Excellent. We're now going to move on to a slightly easier tense, and that is the near future tense. So we use the near future tense to talk about actions that are going to happen. Going to do something. And the key idea, as you can tell, is the idea of going to do something. And we'll look at another future tense in a moment that is used in slightly different ways. So to form this near future tense, so what we're going to do, we need the present tense of the verb aller, which we looked at a moment ago, and we just need to add the infinitive. So let's just quickly revise the present tense of aller. We have je vais, we have tu vas, il va or elle va, we have nous allons, we have vous allez, ils or elles vont, ils, elles vont. So we have je vais, tu vas, il va, nous allons, vous allez, ils vont. And an infinitive, we know what an infinitive is. It could be something like cuisiner. It's that form of the verb that has that er, ir, or re. So it could be cuisiner, it could be danser, to dance, it could be finir, to finish. So for example, I am going to finish is going to be je vais. So I have to take the I form of aller in the present tense, je vais, and my infinitive to finish, finir. Je vais finir. And then you could add things like mes devoirs, ce soir, for example. Je vais finir mes devoirs ce soir. And that's a nice little example there of the near future tense. And that's really it. There aren't really any irregular forms or anything that we need to worry about like that. We just know we're going to have that present tense of aller and the infinitive. A nice easy tense there. Especially if you struggle with the future tense, then you can just use this one, which is fairly easy. Alors, moving on now, we're going to be looking at another future tense, which is the simple future. So the simple future is a little bit different, and it describes what will happen. What will happen. So before we were looking at what was going to happen, now we're looking at what will happen. And the way we form this future tense is a little bit different. We take the whole infinitive. So for example, we know we could have an infinitive like dormir, and then we just add my ending on. And that's a really nice feature of this tense. We just take the whole infinitive, like dormir, and just add the ending on. However, there's one little thing to remember. If your verb ends in e, you need to remove it. Remove that e. Alors. So for example, well, for your re verbs, you're going to be removing that e, and then you're going to add your ending. So that's a really key fact to know when you're conjugating in this tense. You just need to take that e off. In terms of the endings, there's a little bit of a trick we have. If you know the verb avoir in the present tense, then you know your endings for the future tense. So let's go through that again. We have j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. So we know this is the present tense, but if we take out a specific part, we have my endings for the future. So you can see what I'm highlighting here, well, are the endings. So if we look at this and go through, we have j'ai, I'm going to use the AI. Tu, I'm going to use that, the AS. Il a, I'm going to use that. So here are my endings. We have a, on, et, on. And those are all derived really from the present tense of avoir. So that's a nice little trick. If you ever forget your endings for the future tense, then you can rely on knowing the present tense. So for example, let's practice using this. And I'm going to use dormir, which is my example up here. So I would say je, I'm going to take my whole infinitive, dormir, and then I will pick my ending. It's je, so I'm going to use AI. Let's write that in a different color. So je dormirai. If I wanted to say they will sleep, so I'll take il, take my whole infinitive, and then I add on the correct ending. So we know that for il, elle, it's going to be ONT. So ils dormiront. Ils dormiront. Excellent. So we have a couple of examples here. Je dormirai and ils dormiront. But if we take a verb that ends in E, so for example, if I wanted to say you will take, we know that to take is prendre, but we know my rule. If it ends in E, take it off. So I'm going to take, this is going to be my stem, and then I'm going to add my ending on, which is going to be AS. So I'm going to add on AS. Tu prendras. Tu prendras. Fairly easy. So the only, I suppose, slightly difficult part is going to be remembering that if your verb ends in E, take it off and then add your ending. Excellent. So those are your endings for your regular verbs. And the ending actually always stays the same, but what can change is the stem, and that's what we're going to see an example of now. So in this box here, we can see our irregular verbs. So these are the verbs that don't follow the pattern, and they don't follow the pattern in that they have a different stem. So être takes the stem ser, pouvoir, P-O-U-R-R, aller, I-R, devoir, D-E-V-R, and then I add my ending onto that. Vouloir, V-O-U-D-R, plus my ending. And savoir, A-S-A-U-R, plus my ending. So être, to be, pouvoir, to be able to, aller, to go, devoir, to have to, vouloir, to want to, and savoir, to know. So for example, let's have a go at conjugating some of these irregulars into the future. Let's do être. I'd have je, ser, so that's my irregular stem, and the ending will stay the same. So it's ai, je serai. Tu, so I have that irregular stem, the ending stays the same. Tu seras. Il or elle, I've got my irregular stem, but my ending will stay the same, so sera. And you can see that process goes on for all of the persons of the verb. And that process will be the same for any of these irregulars. So je devrais, je saurais, and that goes on for all of them. Again, there are more irregulars for the future, but these are just the key ones to know for now. Alors, we're now going to move on to the next tense, which is the conditional tense. And you can see I've put here, it's got the same formation as the future tense, which makes it really nice and easy. And we use the conditional to talk about what would happen. So I would go, I would play, I would buy. So you can see these are all talking about hypothetical scenarios which could, should, or would happen. Alors. So, in terms of forming it, you can see that it is the same as the future. We take the whole stem, or the whole infinitive, and then just add our ending. And what's really nice is that the endings are the same as our imperfect tense endings. So, we have a, ions, ie, a. So, like I said, you'll notice these come from the imperfect, but it's really important that you make that distinction between the imperfect and the conditional. So remember, with the imperfect, we take the ending off first. However, for the conditional, we don't. So I could say je, so keep that. I take my whole infinitive, let's say jouer, and then I add on my ending, a. The pronunciation then changes. Je jouerai. Tu, so that's I would play. You would play. We take the whole infinitive, jouer, and then I add on my u ending, which is a. Tu jouerais. Let's say I wanted to say they would play, ils, then I take jouer, my whole infinitive, and add on this ending, the A-I-E-N-T. So ils joueraient. And you can see that the pronunciation is the same for all of these. Je jouerai, tu jouerais, il jouerait, although there is that slight spelling change. And what's really nice is that the irregulars in the future are the irregulars in the conditional. So those irregulars we looked at a moment ago in the future are the same in the conditional. And that's a really nice nice feature of the conditional. So the conditional is probably one of the easier tenses to learn, just because you sort of take all your information from your other tenses and just combine it into one. So we take the whole infinitive and add the ending, and the endings are the same as the imperfect endings. And the irregulars in the future are the same as the irregulars in the conditional. So it's a really nice tense. It's one that's taken loads of different aspects of all the different tenses you know. And that's how we say what would happen. Good. Alors, we're now going to move on to the pluperfect tense. Sounds more confusing than it is. So the pluperfect is used to describe what had happened. So what had happened. For example, I had eaten. I had eaten. Or you had spoken. We had played. Things like that. So the way we form it in French is we need the imperfect tense of avoir or être, and then we add on the past participle. So we've seen the past participle, and avoir is actually a regular verb. So we have j'avais, tu avais, il avait, nous avions, vous aviez, ils, elles avaient. So that's our imperfect form of avoir. So j'avais, tu avais, il avait, nous avions, vous aviez, ils avaient. And then we've seen our past participle before, but just to recap, my ER verbs, we have E accent, IR verbs, we have I, and RE verbs, we have you. So for example, let's take danser, danser to dance. Oh, so we have danser. We take off that ER and we add E accent. So we get danser like that. So, j'avais dansé. I had danced. Tu avais dansé. You had danced. Il avait dansé. He had danced, etc. Nous avions dansé. We had danced. And that's sort of that pattern. So just be careful that the pluperfect tense does have the same irregularities as the perfect. So we do also have these Mrs. van der Trump verbs. So Mrs. van der Trump does carry through into the pluperfect as well. So you need to know the imperfect tense of être, which we have been through. So j'étais, tu étais, il était, nous étions, vous étiez, ils étaient, and then we'd have the past participle. So for example, let's take aller. If I wanted to say we had gone, I would say nous étions, because it's a Mrs. van der Trump verb, aller. Nous étions aller with an S because whenever we have a Mrs. van der Tramp verb, it all has to agree. So it's plural here, so your past participle also has to be plural. If it was feminine, it would have an extra E on the end. So nous étions allés is an example of a Mrs. van der Tramp verb in the pluperfect tense. If you're not struggling, if you're finding this a bit difficult, then it doesn't come up too often, but it can be one that can score you some nice points in the writing exam or in the speaking exam. Okay, we're now going to look at the present subjunctive. So the present subjunctive is quite a tough concept to grasp, but it's a really useful one because it can really score you some points in the exam. So let's quickly go over how you form it, and then I'll talk about when exactly you use it. So firstly, we need to know that we're going to take the third person plural form in the present tense of our verb. And all that means is the il, elle form. So for example, let's take ils jouent. Ils jouent. So we know that's my il, elle form in the present tense because we have that ent. Ils jouent, present tense, easy. My second step is to remove the ent to get my stem. So we have jou without that ent, and that's my stem for the subjunctive. And here are my endings. So now that I have jou, I then add on the appropriate ending. So I'd have je joue, tu joues, il joue. Now this looks very similar to the present tense because it is, but the real difference is with the nous and vous form. So it would be nous jouions, nous jouions, vous jouiez, and then il, elle joue, as we would probably expect it. Good. So we have je joue, tu joues, il joue, nous jouions, vous jouiez, il joue. So yeah, just be really careful with firstly how you get your stem. So you have the il, elle form in the present tense. In terms of knowing when to use the subjunctive, it can quite often be difficult to know all the nuances of when to use it. However, the key idea when we are using subjunctive is this idea of doubt. So that this idea of doubt or uncertainty is usually a good indicator of using the subjunctive. Another key idea to think about with the subjunctive is the idea of que. So whenever you see que, you will usually have a subjunctive with it. Obviously context dependent, but a lot of the time you'll see. So for example, if we look at these sentences, these are all phrases that would be followed with the subjunctive. So c'est possible que, c'est possible que, or c'est impossible que. It's possible or impossible that we have que. So you can see we have our two elements that we were really looking for. We have our uncertainty, c'est impossible, and we have que, c'est impossible que. So we'd have plus the subjunctive. C'est impossible que nous jouions au foot. It's impossible that we'll play football. Il vaut mieux que, it's better if. This one doesn't quite show doubt or uncertainty, but you can see the que. So, il vaut mieux que nous jouions au foot. It's better if we play football. C'est dommage que, it's a shame that, or it's too bad that. We've got the que, and we have got this idea of emotions or feelings, which also can take the subjunctive. But you can see the theme of que, and these are some set phrases that you can employ into your writing and your speaking to really show that you can use it. So yeah, I think this is quite a nice little structure to put in there. And if you're looking for an absolute set phrase, you can use autant que je sache. Autant que je sache, as far as I know. So that's a nice little phrase to put in. An absolute set phrase to put in, you can say autant que je sache. Autant que je sache. I'll write that again just a little bit more clearly, just so you can make that out. Autant que je sache just means as far as I know. So for example, autant que je sache, je vais jouer au foot. As far as I know, I'm going to play football. Autant que je sache, je vais me marier. As far as I know, I'm going to get married. So, those are some of the uses of the subjunctive and how we form it. Okay, the penultimate thing that I want to cover are reflexive verbs. So firstly, what are they? They're verbs that we use to talk about actions that you do to yourself. So for example, we have, I don't know, se laver les dents, to wash one's teeth. These can be easily identified as they will all have se in front of them. And we could look at these, we have se sentir, se brosser. Se brosser, we could just have plus things like les dents, to brush your teeth. Se brosser les dents. S'entendre bien avec, it's a hidden se, because really what we're saying is se entendre. And we know that in French we can't have both. So we just get rid of one of them and put an apostrophe in. So, reflexives, actions that we do to ourselves, and they will have se in front of them. Se lever, se brosser les dents, se sentir, to feel. Se sentir means to feel. Now, when we conjugate a reflexive verb, we need to have a reflexive pronoun in front of it. And these are the corresponding reflexive pronouns in French. So for je, it'll be paired with me. Tu, te. Il, se. Nous, nous. Vous, vous. Il, elle, se. So for example, let's take the verb se remarier, to get remarried. Se remarier. Alors, so if I said I am getting remarried, I would say je, but I need the me because that's my reflexive. We have je and me always together. Je me, tu te, il se. Je me, then I conjugate remarier as normal. Je me remarie. You get married. Tu te. The tu and the te are always going to be together. Then you conjugate remarie with an S this time, remember? Let's think about we get remarried. It's going to be nous, so we have two nous. Nous remarions. So nous remarions. Let's change the tense now. So if we look at the future tense with the reflexive, I might say je me remarierai. Je me remarierai. I will get remarried. Or il se, because il and se are my pair, il se, and I'll say remarieront. So ils se remarieront. Quite a mouthful. So je me remarierai, ils se remarieront. So we can change these reflexives into any tense, and the key point is just having these pairings. Je me, and then your verb. Tu te plus the verb. Il se, and the verb. Nous, vous, vous, il, elle, se, plus the verb. And that's how we use reflexive pronouns in French. The final thing that I'm going to cover today is the present participle. So the present participle is the equivalent of the sort of ing part of the verb, that ing part of the verb. So playing, eating. Now, we will most commonly see this present participle, this form, in combination with the word on. Now, in this instance, on can mean by, whilst. So by, whilst, through. So it's quite a diverse word in terms of how you translate it. Commonly used with en, by, whilst, or through. So we have en plus this present participle. En plus present participle. So by doing something, whilst doing something. And the way we form it, we take the new form in the present tense. So the present tense forms such a huge part of everything we do in the grammar in French. So let's take a verb. Let's say nous parlons. Nous parlons. That's my new form of the verb. Second step is to remove the en. And then my third step is to add ant. Ant. So it'll look like this. Parlons. So we often have it with en, not always, but often. And en parlant is whilst talking. So whilst by talking. So for example, let's give an example in context. I would say je réussis mes examens en révisant. So I pass my exams. Je réussis mes examens en révisant. By revising. En révisant. Or you could say en écoutant mon prof. En écoutant. So by listening. And again, we have the révisant ending in ant, écoutant, ant. So we have that en and the present participle. Alors, that's everything that I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully you found this useful. If you have, then please consider subscribing. And if you want to download either a blank or filled in copy of this knowledge organizer, then just head to the link, which will be in the description below, where you can download these to print off and use for your own revision. Merci beaucoup et au revoir.